coming in bright and early. Hopefully your ears were okay. So I will speak first this morning. I will start with the New Year's Eve roundup from around the state and then progress on to road policing and the road safety. And then Minister Enoch here, obviously, as well. We right, Mon?
Yes, ready to go.
All right, my name is Acting Chief Superintendent Christopher Stream, attached to the Road Policing Regional Support Command. So I'd like to brief you this morning on the New Year's Eve roundup from across the state. So we saw in some areas increased crowd numbers. That included on the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast, where they saw large crowd numbers enjoying the fireworks at various locations within the city. We also saw a crowd of approximately 60,000 at South Bank. Again, watching the fireworks, enjoying festivities. I am very pleased to announce that across the Brisbane region area we saw low numbers of disturbances and low numbers of arrests, less than 50 arrests in total across the Brisbane region, and very low numbers of arrests across the Gold Coast and also the Sunshine Coast area. Gold Coast saw large numbers within Surfers Paradise and the Broadbeach area, and on the Sunshine Coast both Mooloolaba and Noosa saw large crowd numbers with some minor disturbances in and around the Noosa area. So those numbers, whilst up in some areas, down a little bit lower across the Brisbane region. Police were generally very pleased with the conduct that they saw of people and also the large numbers of people that we saw using public transport. Our random breath testing and random drug testing numbers have moved back towards acceptable, or sorry, I shouldn't say acceptable, there's no acceptable rates with regards to random and drug testing rates. But we have seen a decrease in the amount of both drug and also drink drivers being tested across the state throughout the Christmas New Year's period, which was pleasing to see. Does anyone have any questions with regards to New Year's Eve?
Were they sort of public nuisance? What were the charges?
Yeah, generally public nuisance, some minor drug offences as well, but largely public nuisance offences. Police did also interrupt provided early intervention, a number of disturbances with intoxicated persons, both adults and youths.
And were they mostly amongst the crowd as opposed to private residences?
Yeah, so across the suburban areas we again saw low calls for police service, and the majority of arrests occurred within the entertainment precincts across South Bank, Gold Coast, the Surfers Paradise, Broadbeach areas. Yeah, I would say actually it's the best behaved years, and given that we're now seeing no restrictions, crowds have actually returned to a lot of those party areas, a lot of those entertainment precinct areas. So generally the crowds were very well behaved, and talking to my colleagues across the state, they were very, very pleased, and the police commanders that worked across the evening with the crowd behaviour.
How many illegal fireworks displays are you aware of?
Look, there were some reports of illegal fireworks displays, and police did attend some of those. Obviously, generally by the time that those notifications are received by police, and generally the illegal ones are short-lived anyway. But there was a small number. There certainly wasn't a large number reported or recorded in the police logging system.
And what's the police presence like today, the day after?
Yeah, it continues on. So we've been conducting a number of random and drug and alcohol tests across the early morning. And in fact, we'd urge people to consider the way in which their bodies process alcohol, because generally when we conduct those operations in the early mornings, although people might have attempted to do the right thing throughout the evening, again, being very cautious and everyone's bodies processes alcohol differently, that you also need to be very cautious for that. So those operations have continued into the morning, and we have normal policing numbers across New Year's Eve Day. Yep, so I can give you the road toll briefing now. So it's a horrific task that I have this morning to confirm to you that we had 299 persons lose their lives across Queensland, which is a horrific number to talk about. So we have not seen figures similar to that since 2009, when we lost 331 lives. And as I said, this is a horrific number to confirm this morning. to you all. As I said, we can't just talk about those being statistics. They are people's lives that are lost, and largely the majority of those accidents were in fact preventable. So we saw those lives lost and those accidents were preventable. What featured largely in those traffic crashes were the fatal five, so speeding, drug and drink driving, fatigue and mobile phones and distraction. We see that year on year contributing to accidents. We're working very hard with our partners at Transport and Main Roads to change driving behaviour. We know that we've seen increased levels of vehicle travel and traffic across our road network since we've moved out of the restrictions due to COVID, and what we've seen is increased risky behaviour. So we have seen drivers selfishly taking to the roads, being drug and drink affected. We know that that significantly increases your chances of being involved in a fatal traffic accident. And as I said, selfishly placing their lives at risk, but also the lives of others. And we've seen that across our figures. What we've also seen is just over 70 motorcycle riders losing their lives. So that included younger riders, but also older riders that have returned to motorcycle riding after a number of years of being absent from motorcycle riding. So contributing to that was speed, alcohol and drugs, but also other drivers. So in not all of those cases was it the motorcycle rider's fault. In some cases it was drivers turning across in front of motorcycles, leaving them very little time to react. So in those cases there, again, we urge motorcycle riders to wear high visibility clothing, drive to road conditions, ride with your headlight on, all of those basic safety factors, as well as wearing the correct safety equipment. We also saw 29 pedestrians lose their lives this year, and in some cases those pedestrians were distracted looking at their mobile phones, that type of activity through some of the suburban and city areas. They were then struck by vehicles due to that distraction. We also saw 12 persons lose their lives as a result of driving into flooded waters, something which is absolutely totally avoidable. In some cases, multiple persons lost their lives as vehicles were swept off the road network. Again, totally avoidable. So a common message there with our colleagues from Queensland Fire and Emergency Services is, of course, if it's flooded, forget it. So as simple as having to take a longer route, that possibly only 10 or 15 minutes extra in your journey could result in you saving your own life and the lives of others, those passengers which you are responsible for. So, and unfortunately we have seen another fatal accident on the Fraser Coast just outside of Bauple this morning involving a prime mover and a trailer and a sedan. We've seen a person lose their life there. So it certainly hasn't been a good start to the new year when we see that type of activity happening on the roads network. But as I said, we just can't simply talk about those lives as statistics. I've talked to a number of victims of road traffic crashes, their families. They are deeply disturbed, and whilst some of them might have gotten over their physical injuries, they certainly haven't got over the mental injuries which they've suffered as a result of those traffic crashes. In some cases, in particular, parents that have lost children due to traffic crashes, and a number of years ago, they are still deeply disturbed by those, as well as people that are suffering significant injuries, still receiving medical treatment, and their lives are altered forever. So what we're urging again today, and we'll be working very, very closely with our partners from Transport and Main Roads, we will be introducing some new strategies across and throughout this year in an effort to tackle those road crashes and reduce those lives lost. Because again, when you talk to their families, all of those people could have had an impact. They're all largely great people, some of them very, very young that have lost their lives and had great futures ahead of them.
Where are we going so wrong, do you think? I know Victoria sent up their stats this morning. I think they had 240, and I just looked at New South Wales and they had 287. So we're ahead of both of those big states. What's happening in Queensland? This is so bad in the past year.
So what we've seen, we have seen those increased traffic conditions. We've seen millions of additional visitors since popular areas, tourist areas open up again. But we've just seen people that are willing to take risks with regards to driving behaviour. So, when we look back to 2009, we saw that 331 lives lost. we saw people taking risks, and again we're seeing that. So people aren't altering their behaviour at all, and in some cases we're seeing groups that are contributing largely to those lives lost. So young male drivers aged between that sort of 17 and 30 mark are contributing heavily towards that. But also we can't forget the serious injury traffic accidents. So what we're seeing there is not completely a different set of factors from the fatal 5, but what we're seeing there is also factors like people making bad judgments, so misjudging distances when they're coming out of intersections and those sorts of things, and those accidents are contributing to serious injury accidents. So again, and those serious injury accidents, like I said, are life-altering, and in some cases those people are requiring 24/7 care for the rest of their lives. So, their quality of life is certainly diminished.
There was a serious accident in Miami last night. Do you know when it was?
Yeah.
People took off?
Yep. So it will be alleged that vehicle was seen speeding prior to impacting 2 other vehicles. So in that accident there were in fact 17 people treated by QAS. 8 of those people were transported to hospital, 3 in critical condition. So again, we see part of the fatal 5 speeding will be alleged contributing to that accident. And I'm told by the emergency responders that attended that accident said it was a miracle that no one was sort of fatally injured.
Is there any updates you can give us on the triple fatal that happened on the Gold Coast on Friday?
So there's no significant updates. Again, police have been checking with the hospital with regards to that. The female driver of that vehicle sustained significant injuries as well. And as of yet, police don't have a medical clearance to interview that female driver. But as soon as we possibly can, that driver will be interviewed.
It's been alleged that she has quite an extensive criminal history. Are you concerned that she was out, I guess, out of jail and has driven and has potentially taken the life of these people?
Look, again, what we see across those lives lost figures is we do see people that have either been disqualified or they're unlicensed driving. So those types of drivers, that type of behaviour does contribute to fatality traffic accidents, absolutely. Yep. Anything else? I can come back after the minister's spoken if you'd like. Yep.
Well, thank you very much. Obviously, plain and simple, it has been a terrible year on Queensland roads. In 2019, we had the lowest road toll since records began, and that trend was continuing in early 2020. The pandemic hit, and we've seen some major changes in behaviour right across our whole way of life, including on our roads. We saw a huge jump in, for instance, motorcycle registrations, and sadly that saw also an increase in the number of motorcycle fatalities. And as you've heard, there have been, in this year, over 70 fatalities regarding motorcyclists. When you compare that to, say, 2018, where we saw just over 40 motorcycle deaths, that's a huge jump. I'm advised that that's around 44% increase with regards to motorcycle fatalities. Sadly, as we've heard today, we've lost 299 lives on Queensland roads this year, which is the worst since 2009, where, as you've heard already, we lost 331 lives. These aren't just numbers, of course. These are people, and there are families that are associated with these 299 lives. These families and those friends are now missing loved ones from around their dinner tables during this festive season and, of course, into the new year. I think we need to also keep in mind that most drivers do the right thing. Most drivers are using the roads in a really safe way. And to those people, I want to say thank you. Thank you for doing the right thing every day when you step into your vehicle. However, we do hear of these fatalities and these terrible events that happen on our roads. And there are too many instances where drivers are making choices, dangerous choices, on our roads that are contributing factors to fatalities. as you've heard, the fatal five, which is what we focus our attention on greatly. And of course, they include drink and drug driving, distraction, so including mobile phone use, speeding, whether you're correctly using a seatbelt or not wearing a seatbelt at all, that is a contributing factor, and of course fatigue. It's why we've seen a major crackdown on the fatal five in recent months. And of course, as you know, further measures with regards to issues like distractions regarding mobile phones, etc. We are seeing some of the mobile phone offences drop away, and it's certainly been a better second half of the year than the first. A big factor, as you've already heard as well, in the first 6 months of this year was the heavy rain and flooding events that we experienced right across Queensland. And of course, we lost a number of lives during that time where people had made decisions to drive through flooded waters. Luckily, we're not having those events right now, but we know that that is always a risk in Queensland. So the message remains very, very clear. If it is flooded, forget it. It is not worth your life to drive through flooded waters. And we've seen people pay with their lives for those decisions. Of course, we continue to ensure that we are providing the funding needed to be able to support Queenslanders to make the right choices, to be informed. We saw, as I've been advised, the state budget delivered more than $1.5 billion towards road safety, and all funds raised through our traffic camera offence program are invested back into road safety. We are doing a great deal in that space, but we need more Queenslanders to do theirs as well, to do their job. And that means slowing down, putting the phone away, wearing a seatbelt properly, not getting behind the wheel impaired by drugs or alcohol, and of course taking a break when you're tired. I'm hopeful that with an improving weather forecast, a record level of improved roads infrastructure being delivered, and better behaviour from drivers, that we'll see a much better year on our roads from 2023. But of course we all play a role in this. Every time you pick up your car keys and jump in your car, you have to think about those fatal five. And of course make those strong and sensible decisions, safe decisions, about how you conduct yourself on our roads, because it's not just your life that you might be putting at risk, it is the lives of others. Any questions for me on that stuff? Back to Commissioner, that's all right.
What will form part of the new strategy for road safety?
Beg your pardon, sorry?
What will form part of the new strategy for road safety?
Yeah, well, obviously the Minister will be working on that, and of course he has continued to do a great deal of work in that space to ensure that we've got the right kind of mix of measures to be able to support good road safety behaviour in our state. It's a great partnership between the Transport and Main Roads team and of course our police service, where that sort of expertise is joined to be able to ensure that we've got the right mix of measures, penalties, and of course laws to be able to support strong road safety in Queensland, and that will continue on. These numbers for 2022 are, like I said, plain and simple, absolutely terrible. It's been a terrible year in 2022, and that's why we continue to provide the funding for that area, and that the work between the police service and Transport and Main Roads will continue to be absolutely vital to ensuring that our roads are safe places to be able to drive.
Yes, so do you think the government has dropped the ball a bit when it comes to road safety messaging? Is it just not out there in the public domain enough?
I don't think that is a fair. I don't think that's a fair description. When you consider the huge investment in road safety, you cannot turn a corner without seeing and hearing about your responsibility as a driver on the roads. You know, when you think about the strict measures we've put in place with regards to one of the fatal five, which of course is distraction, the mobile phone measures that we've put in, and of course those penalties, As I said, it's nice to see that that is dropping off slightly in the second half of the year, but certainly, that's in place specifically to be able to deal with the issue of distraction. We know that looking at your mobile phone whilst you're driving, utilising your mobile phone whilst you're driving is incredibly hazardous. And that's why those penalties were put in place, and that's why we continue to put as much as we can into the messaging around road safety, and that massive investment around road safety is a true indication of that.
And Minister, just quickly, so on the triple fatality on the Gold Coast, do you have any concerns that that driver was out after having an extensive criminal history?
Well, obviously right now the police need to have space to be able to do the work that they do. We've heard very clearly already that they will be awaiting that medical clearance to be able to have those conversations with that particular driver, and of course the police will make their assertions after that, and so we need to let them be able to do that without any other commentary from the side. Thanks.
From a police perspective, what are some of the new road safety measures that we'll see rolled out this year?
So you will see increased random and drug testing conducted across different time frames. So we've been working again with our colleagues at Transport and Main Roads and the Road Safety Data Bureau, which is hosted at Transport and Main Roads, but involves staff from Queensland Transport, Queensland Health, as well as Queensland Police Service. Their analytical capabilities are excellent in terms of basically crunching the data from that. So we'll be looking at better placing those random drug and alcohol testing, as well as we'll be conducting some experimentation with regards to some technology that looking at impaired driving. So we'll be testing that with a university throughout this year. And you'll see other increased rollouts of the camera program across the state as more of those cameras come online, and that included recently on the Warrego Highway things like the point-to-point cameras, which we see have a significant effect on driver behaviour coming online, as well as an increased amount of red light and combination red light and speed cameras at intersections that are known to have crash history. And also there'll be some further announcements tomorrow.
And there's also, I suppose, last week, the measures to do with park thefts, which contributed to some crashes as well. Do you think that will have an impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the government has announced the trial of the engine immobilisers across 3 different areas, Mount Isa, Townsville and Cairns. And what we've seen overseas is that has had an impact where you can remotely immobilise a vehicle or track a vehicle. And we've found that cars that possess that current technology have assisted police greatly in terminating those vehicles being driven dangerously.
Is there anything further you can tell us about that Glasshouse Mountains incident where a tree has fallen on a car? Is that just a freak accident, does it seem like?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, talking to my colleagues on the Sunshine Coast, they're unable, and then the investigation of course does continue, they're unable to determine exactly whether it was some form of rot or some sort of animal intervention. But the tree, and a large section of that tree obviously broke away. Unfortunately, as that vehicle was passing under, a couple of seconds either way, the vehicle would have been clear, but struck the vehicle, and then the vehicle exited the road.
The stretch of road where the triple fatal happened, that's a 60 zone along there. We were there yesterday. Cars absolutely fly down that road. Every neighbour we spoke to said they just sit as soon as they hear screeching tyres, or they just literally brace for a crash. Is there anything that can be done along that street? It's a very long road, Benogan Road. Is there anything that has been looked into along there? Has it been a problem before? It's quite long, narrow, and I don't know.
So there's
yesterday.
There's a number of roads across all of those police districts which might have areas that are difficult to police traditionally in terms of deploying speed cameras and that type of activity, but we are constantly reviewing those areas, and where we see crash history, or we get information coming in from the public. What is very important is for the public to report that type of information. So we've got a number of different avenues in through police links, for reporting the hooning activity, but also speeding activity. That sort of information, and I'm not saying it hasn't happened in this case, but when we get that sort of information, that is fed through and again worked through with that Road Safety Data Bureau, and there are other methodology which we can use for that. So we have handheld speed camera devices like TrueCam devices and that sort of stuff. So that's where residents in an area, it's really vital that we get that type of information so that we can then enforce or conduct enforcement activity as well as provide education within those areas. So we don't just solely rely on enforcement. It's about education as well, and that messaging which you talked about before. Again, our colleagues at Transport and Main Roads are working extremely hard on that, and they've had some really successful programs, and I'll give you an example of that is the e-scooter program. So we knew people were going to be getting those e-scooters for Christmas, and we've seen increased injury accidents as well as some fatalities around that, and they've run a great program, education program in terms of that, and then also the QPS and our partners at TMR and the government worked very, very quickly to introduce legislation in regards to regulating that. That included those reduced speeds, both on the roadway where they can be ridden and on the footpaths, as well as the legislation around safety equipment and also the safety equipment which must be maintained on the e-scooters, like the bells and those sorts of things.
How much were juveniles or stolen cars, youth crime, those kind of things contributed to the road toll this year? Was there an increase?
I can't talk specifically about the exact numbers around an increase in comparison to other years. So yeah, I couldn't provide you the exact figures on that. No, sorry.
With the, can I just confirm with the Laura crash in Laura, even though it was on December 18, he passed away, is that that's the 299?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
correct.
That was last year.
Yeah. Yeah, because of the accident actually occurred back on the 18th. Yeah.
Just some information about a wounding investigation in Sunnybank Hills. Can you give some information on
Is that Rydale Road?
I don't know the road in there.
Okay, yep.
It's come through from, yeah. So there was the party at Sunnybank Hills, 2 teens.
Yep, 15 to 16-year-old.
Yeah.
One.
Just some info about that.
Yeah, so police were called to that residence in Sunnybank Hills due to a disturbance occurring. Basic information that was provided at the time is that a number of youths attended a party uninvited. During attempts to direct those persons away, disturbance initiated. And unfortunately, we saw 2 juveniles, 15 and 16-year-old, one stabbed in the torso and one stabbed in the upper thigh. Queensland Ambulance Services provided information that those are not life-threatening wounds, and those children were transported to hospital for treatment.
Hopefully a bit of a blight on everyone else's good behaviour, considering at the start you said everyone else was pretty well behaved.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did see low issues right across other suburban areas as well. The conduct was largely quite good, given the numbers that were out in most of the areas. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. No, that's all right. Not a problem.